I'm Brian. I'm the Chief Client Officer at the Trade Desk. I'm going to talk today for about 15 minutes about 5 ways we think programmatic advertising is going to evolve in 2017. So the first thing that we're seeing this year is the rise of advanced TV. And so far, I think it's more been about exploration than anything else. Some early test budgets, not a whole lot of things. By advanced TV, I mean spend that's moving from linear TV into addressable advertising, spend that's moving into over-the-top devices, connected TV, spend that's moving into more full episode player type of content. I think what's interesting about this is that consumers have already moved this way. So if you look at some of the recent stats about over-the-top and connected TV, millennials are actually more likely to have a Netflix subscription than they are to have a cable subscription. 50% of US homes now actually are watching streaming video on their television. I think it's pretty clear from everyone's behavior that consumer eyeballs have moved that way, but marketing dollars really haven't followed in as big a way as you might expect. We recently learned at the Trade Desk as a DSP that we are the largest buyer of connected TV inventory from a number of the major SSPs, which was surprising for us to learn because the numbers in spend aren't that big yet. They're mostly still in the test budget phase. So I think the question is, what's blocking connected TV and OTT from wider adoption? And the first thing I call out is that the measurement is really challenging. TV dollars traditionally are transacted on Nielsen GRPs, on ComScore VCE type measurement. This was some stats from ComScore where they found that the average household now has 10 devices. If you look at households of 4 people, the average goes up to about 18 devices. That's a really hard problem to solve from a measurement standpoint. When you look at, well, how do I measure someone's consumption of video across a PC, an Xbox, a PlayStation, a Roku, different people in the same household watching the same content? It's a tough thing to solve, and I think what ComScore is doing with their Total Home product, actually going to the router and saying, let's measure across every device in the household, could be a way to unlock some of that spend to help compare more apples to apples with GRPs. Nielsen, I think, is the other sticking point here. I think a lot of the dollars haven't moved over because Nielsen's been doing a lot of work to say, how do we actually measure this on Apple TV and Roku and other connected devices? But it's not really there yet. So again, for somebody who's used to buying on TV, is used to the scale and the reach and transacting on a cost per point or number of the GRPs they expect to see, that's just not there yet on connected TV. But I expect that's something in 2017. As that measurement ramps up, I think you start to see spend unblocked because consumers are already there. I think the good news is that DSPs, this is what we as an industry are good at, is solving fragmentation. I looked at one connected TV OTT campaign that we're running today and pulled a report, and we were running on all of these devices today. So this isn't technology that we're talking about being available 6 months, 12 months down the road. We're running a campaign today with over-the-top targeting users on a Roku, on a Samsung Smart TV, on an Xbox, on a Nintendo Wii. All that's happening today, and I think that's what DSPs are good at. The app space on connected TV is really fragmented. There's a lot of long-tail apps outside of the major networks and major players there. And you need to have a system to aggregate that. And luckily, I think that's what we're good at. The other big theme I think we're going to see next year with advanced TV is that addressable is about to get big. So far, I think if you look at the spend in addressable TV on Dish Network and DirecTV and others, it's generally in the $200 million a year kind of neighborhood. If you look at what just happened with the AT&T Time Warner merger, there was a lot of talk from both CEOs about how this is going to be powered by addressable advertising. AT&T announced they're going to launch a $35 cable package. Instead of a skinny bundle, this is more of a kind of a fat bundle. But for $35, you get 100 channels. And the only way the economics on that actually work is if you think about addressable advertising. How do we get advertisers and marketers willing to pay more to reach a user with a targeted ad when it's all internet delivered? But I think that merger in particular tells a lot about where the industry is headed in the next couple of years. So second major theme, again, a place where we've seen a lot of testing this year, and I expect to see more budgets coming in next year, which is offline sales attribution. If you look at the majority of the campaigns on our platform today, in programmatic and just in digital in general, it's generally one of these 4 goals. So viewability, I want to transact on viewable inventory, or I want a 70% viewable threshold. Click-through rate or cost per click still being used by many campaigns. Sometimes it's just about reach and delivery. Or in other cases, we have a lot of campaigns that are cost per acquisition, cost per install, cost per download, typically on a last click or last view basis. And I don't think that's really changed in the past 5 years or so. But I think what happens with those types of goals is that you have negative consequences for the consumer. So if I think about something like viewability being a goal that a lot of large marketers now have, what does that lead to? Well, take a mobile device. One of the most in-demand units on our platform right now are interstitials. And an interstitial, highly viewable, this can be in view for more than a second. It's going to get a high click-through rate because you're probably trying to X out of the ad and you click it by accident. But that is something that our agency partners and advertisers are all demanding in higher volumes. While from a consumer standpoint, when I talk to friends outside the industry, they look at that as a pop-up ad, right? That's just another way of having a pop-up on a mobile phone. So again, those objectives of having viewability and click-through rate start to drive sometimes perverse incentives for publishers to react. Or native content. I think there's plenty of native executions that we see that are good. They fit with the content you have on the page. They fit with the editorial concept. But there's others that ruin the consumer experience, that clutter up the whole page. But again, that's being driven by objectives that maybe aren't really what the marketers want. Which is a shame because there's so much more that's possible right now. So one simple example, we work with a company called Cardlytics. And so if you take an example of Home Depot as an advertiser, they can run a campaign where they show 1 million ads to 1 million different users on a mobile device. And we have the device IDs for all of those that we can pass to Cardlytics. Cardlytics has partnerships with all the major credit card companies who can say, okay, with those 1 million device IDs, let's map those to cookies, map those to emails, let's map it to the actual credit card transaction data at the Home Depot level. So when you go to Home Depot, you check out, you swipe your credit card, and it says Home Depot on your credit card statement. Cardlytics is accessing that data in an anonymous way. So you can actually track with that campaign how much spend was driven inside of that Home Depot. That's super powerful because you're getting beyond a click or viewability or a proxy for what you actually want to happen, which is people spending money in Home Depot. If you look at overall, about 7% of US retail is e-commerce. 93% still takes place offline, in store. You don't buy bags of bark mulch on the internet. You go to Home Depot and pick it up. So I think these types of offline sales studies have existed for a long time. What hasn't existed until more recently is the ability to optimize and say, hey, based on what I'm seeing, I'm going to make changes to the campaign, the types of people I'm targeting, to try to hit more of the users who might convert. Another example of that, in terms of what's possible right now, this is a dog food brand that we worked with. And they actually had their own data set of in-store sales data by store, so Kroger's in Louisville, Kentucky, by store ID, by shelf, by SKU. They have all that data at the brand level. And what they did was they said, hey, well, what about inside the DSP if we said, let's create a campaign or a line tied to every single store of the thousands of stores that we look at, and let's optimize based on sales of our product in that store. And they started passing us sales data. And they didn't actually pass us their actual sales data because that was too valuable, too proprietary. They passed us an index. So 100 would be a store that's performing at baseline. A 143, the green arrow, that's a store that was up 43%. 68 is a store that was down. And they automated the campaign to say, let's push more budget to the stores that are underperforming, tie-ins from the shopper marketing dollars. Again, that's not at a user level. That's not necessarily tying to a device ID or an attribution path. But I think the reason it's so interesting is that that's the real business result that the marketer cares about. They want to see sales of that dog food brand go up in Kroger stores in Louisville, and they're actually optimizing the campaign to that exact outcome. Another theme I think we expect to see next year is that advertising can get better and more immersive from a consumer point of view. And I think we have to think a lot more about how do we continue to improve the user experience. The rise of ad blocking, the move towards, you see a lot of analysts looking at the Time Warner deal and saying, hey, it seems like consumers are more willing than ever to just pay for content. Are ad-funded models, are they viable in the future or not? Are we going to see consumers being willing to pay more just to have the content? And I think we need to think about what's the best way as an industry that programmatic can help solve that. And one way to look at that is with cross-device targeting. So I think right now, because of that fragmentation problem, the average marketer and agency, they're targeting the same user across a number of different devices, and they have a frequency cap at the device level, but they're not doing that more holistically. They're not saying, how do I set a 10 per 24 or 10 per 30 days F cap for all the users across all of their devices? And they're trying to annoy consumers, and you see the rise in ad blocking. And I think part of the reason that some of that gets stymied is the fact that there's not enough creative formats. We often talk to agencies and say, hey, you could be doing this in cross-device. You could be managing this all from one DSP, and they don't actually have the creative format. They don't have the Spotify 15-second spot. They don't have the mobile unit. And so sometimes that comes down to creative assets. But it's also about striking the right balance between, I want to achieve brand recall. I want to show enough of my message to get a consumer to remember it. But I also don't want to annoy the consumer and cause brand rejection. And so I would compare and contrast an example with Spotify, who we launched with this year in programmatic audio. Someone's throwing a dinner party, they're cooking, they're listening to Spotify in the background, they've got the dinner party mix on, they've declared what they're doing at that very time. That's a super interesting data point to say, hey, I can contextually target and target that moment and target that user based on all of that data. And it's a more natural part of the experience. It's playing in the background to run an ad for a pasta brand or a tomato sauce brand. Contrast that with the average experience on a full episode player. You're watching a TV show online, you see, okay, this is ad 1 of 8, and you're like, oh my God, I have to watch 8 ads. And then 3 of the 8 ads are the same car commercial, over and over and over again. These are problems we can solve, but it's not happening today, and I think consumers are going to keep acting out unless we start to find that balance. Another big theme we saw start to happen this year, and expect to see more of in 2017, was the quiet arrival of the unified auction. This is something a lot of us have been talking about on the sell side and the buy side for years of, hey, 5 years ago, a DSP only got access to really the bottom of the waterfall. Direct sold went first for the publisher, then they gave some to ad networks, and the rest would be sent to an SSP or an exchange. And that changed pretty dramatically in 2016 to say, with the rise of header bidding, let's see some of that programmatic demand actually compete at the top of the waterfall. There's kind of two sides to that coin. So the good news, if you're a buyer, a lot more premium inventory. You would now actually have access to things that were being direct sold before. You have access to that top of the waterfall to buy those more premium placements. If you're a seller, if you're a publisher, that means you have access to demand that might outperform what your sales force is doing. So if you were selling at a $10 CPM and you've got programmatic bids coming in from DSPs at $15, that's outperforming your sales team. That's a net positive for you as a publisher. Here's the bad news. CPMs are up. And I think this is something that's not being talked about enough, is that if you look at in the past 12 months, we looked platform-wide across all of our open exchange buying just in display, and we looked at CPMs. So we took out all targeting, said no behavioral targeting, nothing like that. Let's just keep it run of exchange, pretty simple contextual type buys. CPMs went up 28% in the last 12 months. So why is that happening? I think there are two reasons. One, you are getting access to better inventory, and that costs more. That's a good thing, right? So you should be willing to pay for better inventory, and we've seen buyers willing to do that. But the downside is that there's more dynamic price floors. The sell side is playing a lot more games than it used to, which has an impact. So a year ago, 2 years ago, if you would bid $3 CPM for display inventory, it might clear at $1. If you bid $3 today, that's probably going to clear at $2 or $2.50. More SSPs are playing more games. It's an arms race. And so I think that spread of bid to clearing price has narrowed substantially in the past year. But a lot of folks on the buy side haven't come to terms with that yet. What does that mean for how you bid? How expressive you need to be to get to the exact right price that you want to be at? What are you really willing to pay for that ad? Because I think we're moving towards a first price auction pretty rapidly. There's also a macro challenge. If you're working in an agency, there's a challenge about, well, who does what inside the agency? So the programmatic media buyer used to just be running the DSP. They were running retargeting, behavioral targeting, those sorts of tactics. Then you saw the rise of private marketplace, encroaching a bit more in the digital media buyer territory. And as you look at guaranteed deals on DSPs now, or partial or audience guarantees, that becomes more of a jump ball. Is that a programmatic buyer doing that? Or is that the digital media buyer? And I think the agencies where we see where this is going well, they're doing cross-training. They're saying every single media buyer on our team needs to be trained in programmatic. It can't just be a specialist model anymore. Last topic is something we've seen a lot of increase in this year, which is bring your own algorithm. And also this general rise of an algorithm marketplace. And so something we've seen overall on our platform is more companies coming in saying, hey, I don't necessarily want to run media, but I want to offer a tool to your media buyers, to traders at the agencies who can use this. A few examples of that. So Weather Channel and IBM Watson, using weather data and the Watson supercomputer to actually optimize campaigns, making that available on DSPs. There's a new company called Cognitive, a startup by some former employees of Rubicon, where they said, hey, let's actually help advertisers build their own custom audience scoring. Let's help them and the agencies build custom algorithms that we can then put to work on a DSP if the DSP has APIs we can access. Performance ad network saying, hey, the ad network model is in trouble. Can we pivot and become a performance company where we're a type of algorithm that you buy on top of the DSP? I think in some DSPs, you see more of a black box where they want to control all decisioning. In others, you see more of an open marketplace approach saying, hey, we as a DSP have some algorithms you can use, but if you want to try out somebody else's, that's great. And then cases where clients are actually bringing their own algorithm or building their own. And you might say, well, that sounds hard. How does a marketer, how does an agency actually build an algorithm? Do I need a team of engineers to do that? Do I need a team of data scientists to do that? And I don't think that's usually the case. I want to talk through just a quick example of what we see when a brand or an agency work together to build their own algorithm. And what it's all about is understanding their consumer. So this was an iced tea brand where they're looking at, hey, here's our ideal consumer. It's a 40-year-old mom, household decision maker. She's located in New York State. She lives within 5 miles of a grocery store or a warehouse club where our brand is carried. She's in market for this. She buys in bulk often. She recently purchased in a grocery store, and we know a little bit about what she does online with her behavior. The brand and the agent sit down and they define who are the types of consumers that really matter based on their research, based on their history with those consumers. And then you use that to inform an algorithm, right? So you can use that to inform what am I willing to bid for that user versus what am I willing to bid for someone who I don't know anything about. Those are all just switches that say, yes, I'm willing to bid more because they fall into the mom segment. Yes, I'm willing to bid more because I know they've bought iced tea from us in the past. I'm willing to bid more based on geo. All these are just a set of rules that a brand or an agency can build without necessarily having a degree in data science to do that. There's a lot more that you can do on top of this, but I think part of what we're trying to do is demystify the idea that you have to have a full team of engineers to go build an algorithm. There's a lot of inputs that both brand and agency can have in terms of informing a campaign and building their own proprietary advantage. A lot of ground to cover in 15 minutes before lunch, but I appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
With that, it sounds like there's a lot to be excited for in 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. So I want to touch on, you talked a lot about TV in the beginning. I want to touch on that because you mentioned, obviously you gave some great stats there as to how households are changing, how many more connected devices they now have, like 8 in a household versus say maybe 1 or nothing kind of 10, 15 years ago. But from an advertiser perspective, the actual budgets going towards that are still in test phase. What kind of budgets are we talking? Like how much is test phase and what is blocking that at the moment?
So I think you're seeing some of that go in more of a direct sold route right now. So I'm sure there are significant budgets that go direct to Roku, for example. That's a big part of what they do is selling advertising across all of their apps. On the programmatic side, I think what's held that back, there's the measurement side of things. But there's also the audience targeting side of can I treat a Roku or an Apple TV as a device ID? And that's still in earlier phases of saying, how do I leverage my existing audience data to go find that audience in connected TV or OTT? And same thing on the measurement standpoint. We generally think that problem will be solved in the same way that a company like TapAd or Drawbridge, they have a unique user map across your mobile phone, your iPad, your desktop. There's no reason that an OTT device can't be another ID on that match table, and we think that's pretty likely to happen.
And you talked about advertisers, their current metrics for measurement for performance are still very much rooted in kind of CPA and last click, last view. Yes, there is a lot more measurement available now, kind of connected devices and that kind of thing. But are advertisers that are still measuring that way ready for this kind of approach?
So I think what we've seen is that in a lot of cases, we've seen some of our agency partners easing the marketer into it by saying, yes, we get that you want viewable ads. That becomes table stakes, right? That becomes table stakes to say we have at least this threshold of viewability. But then beyond that, what are we actually trying to do with this campaign? And I think having both those things in place of saying, yes, we understand that you have a goal around viewability, but we also want to track what your actual business result is. I think generally what we've seen is that the technology is there. I'm not sure how aware marketers are of what can be done. I think there's a lot of work they've done in the past with, if you think about Nielsen Catalina or offline brand studies, they tend to be more campaign end type studies of saying, okay, great, we ran for 6 months and here's what happened. I think there's a slight shift to that to say, instead of saying what happened and kind of patting ourselves on the back or firing someone over it, into going more of an approach of saying, well, actually, let's use that more real time, even if it's on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. Inform the campaign based on what's happening in the store, based on what's happening at the SKU or product level.
So you think that agencies can definitely help kind of move this along. And you talked about agencies and kind of the resource and what knowledge needs to be shared among teams. Obviously, you have the challenge of kind of a TV team doing the traditional OTT linear stuff and then the programmatic team buying video, and like where do the two meet? Do you feel that companies like yourselves, like the Trade Desk, can help to help agencies understand exactly who needs to know what and what knowledge can be shared across?
Yeah, I mean, a couple places we've seen growth there. So one is, in the cases in TV, when there's been kind of the best cooperation, it's when you have the TV people sitting in the room from the agency and the programmatic people in the same room talking about what they can do. Because they're two totally different languages. Buying linear broadcast TV is a totally different skill set than buying programmatic. At the same time, the programmatic teams typically have a much better idea on how to buy an audience that goes beyond a more traditional demo. So in the cases where we've seen success, it's when the TV team is bringing to the table and saying, hey, I know the right price point to buy a spot or to buy my cost per point in this market. And the programmatic team is saying, great, that's one read, that's one metric we want to care about, that's your historic metric. But let's start to branch out into what's the actual audience you want to reach that gets more granular than in 18 to 49. I do think there's an education gap. We've seen this across a lot of agencies we work with where we built something called the Trading Academy. It's a 20-hour certification course. It goes from kind of a 101 to a 501 course level series, online videos to teach people about programmatic. And we've seen a lot of agencies engaging to say, hey, I've got a bunch of digital media planners who don't know programmatic, and I've got TV buyers who don't know programmatic. I need to start to change that, as programmatic is a much broader chunk of the overall media plan.
And I want to touch on, I was fascinated by BYOA, Bring Your Own Algorithm, and the potential that it actually isn't as difficult as advertisers might think to be able to bring that kind of knowledge and kind of their own algorithms into their own business. Why would they want to when there's so many more intelligent people out in the market that are building these algorithms for them? What is the actual benefit for them that haven't got data science backgrounds, kind of building, I guess, a much more basic level of algorithm? Is that any better than what's out there now?
I look at the two things as complementary. So I think if you go to any DSP, they're going to talk about, hey, here's our team of data scientists, here's the algorithms that we built, and that's their special sauce. And that's great. That's how DSPs are often tested. But that's not to say they should be the be-all, end-all of how you run a performance campaign. If you go to any marketer agency, they're going to know their consumer and their data better than the DSP ever will. A DSP, for example, might have a great idea for how to optimize credit card campaigns. That doesn't mean they know how to do American Express better than Visa or Visa better than MasterCard. There are nuances to each of those brands and the cards they offer and the types of products they have, where the brand and the agency can have a seat at the table to say, let's build something that's a little bit more custom to our business. This is built around our travel rewards card, not just credit card industry as a whole. I think it's just getting a little bit more granular to complement, particularly on the audience side, with what the DSP might be doing already.
Okay, interesting. And one final question before we have to go into the next panel. I wanted you talk about immersive advertising, and you mentioned Spotify and kind of the increase of native content and how that's kind of driving a more immersive, kind of engaged consumer. Do you think that in 2016 we are finally listening to consumers more? We're finally asking them what it is they actually want to see and creating formats around that?
I don't know. I think we've we've done a little bit of both. I think in some places it's getting better by saying, hey, with programmatic audio, for example, you can start to avoid that problem of annoying a consumer. If you listen to terrestrial, just old school radio, and you listen to it for an hour, you hear a bunch of the ads again and again and again. Again, that can have a purpose to get brand recall. There's a reason Geico and other big brands do that to a point. But then you can cross that threshold where all of a sudden the consumer starts saying, okay, this has gone too far, I want to start blocking the ad altogether. And I do think we see consumers doing that. And so I just generally think that getting better at cross-device, getting better at ad experiences where we're conscious of what the consumer themselves is experiencing and setting frequency caps and using other tools that have existed for years to try and fix that becomes a bigger and bigger piece as consumers spend more time in digital.
But the future looks bright.
Future's bright overall, yeah.
Yay. Okay. With that, I want to say thank you very much, Brian, for a great keynote, great Q&A.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.